If you're fighting with a family member, how does that affect your kids? Hi there, and welcome back to Ask Dr. Syra, the show where I answer your questions about personal growth, mental health, and relationships. Today's question comes from Ranjani. Ranjani says, I no longer talk to my family members because they are toxic for me. Will this negatively impact my kids? I no longer talk to my family members because they are toxic for me. Will this impact my kids? This is a tough one because, when in the work that I do with clients and we're starting to set boundaries. So what boundaries are is we're kind of letting people know what's okay with us and what's not okay with us, how much we're willing to do for other people when we need our own space and our own time. So for many people who have grown up as people pleasers, it's hard to set boundaries. And so learning to set boundaries is a big achievement, right? To say, you know what, these particular people, I need to keep them a bit at arm's length because they're, when I'm too close to them, it's not a good situation for me. So sometimes we have to kind of, move people, I call it move people to the outer circle. And sometimes those are family members. So sometimes it needs to happen, right? So I just want to acknowledge that right up front, Ranjani, that the fact that you've been able to set boundaries and say these certain people are actually quite difficult to be around, they're toxic for me, and I'm going to keep my distance. I think that's a big thing, and I want to applaud you for that step. Now, what's the aftermath of that, right? What's the impact of that on your kids? That's the question. So one of the things I like to think about when I'm thinking about families, right, is rather than this idea of cutting people off, I like to use the idea of a pause button, just a pause button. Because they're your family. They're going to be around. They might be around, get-togethers. You're going to see them if if they're your parents, they might want to see your kids. There's going to be times when you're going to have them around. So rather than thinking of it as a cutoff, which then means every single time you interact, it's uncomfortable and awkward and awful, think about it as a pause, right? So what the pause does is it allows you then to make space that in the future, if there was a change, that maybe you'd be open to, being in a relationship with some other version of them in the future. And so when you think of it that way, it's like we're taking a little break from spending a lot of time with this person rather than we no longer speak to them, right? And what that allows, again, it allows for growth. It allows for change. It allows us to be in the moment with a person rather than relating to them and maybe relating to them because we know them as toxic, but maybe they've made some significant changes, right? And so we don't really give people a chance when we say we're cutting you off. And so that's something I would encourage you to think about is the difference between cutting someone off and the pause button. So when you bring it that way to your kids, right? That, for now, at this time, we're not really spending much time with those people rather than we don't talk to them, right? It's a different approach. So that teaches your children that you can set boundaries. Absolutely, it's important to set boundaries. And we're not giving up on anybody. We're saying that potentially in the future, if something dramatically was to change and you were to change in these particular ways, maybe I could be comfortable being around you. Right now, that's not you. So I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait. And, as it happened with me, I have family members that I kind of pressed the pause button on, and they passed away before we were actually able to create that loving, connected, deep bond that I wished for. They never changed, right? They actually continued to be that kind of a person for the rest of their life until they died. And so now I have this opportunity to create a relationship with their spirit, right? So now it's like a new level of grief and healing when, okay, they couldn't be who kind of I needed them to be in this life, but maybe it wasn't about me, right? Maybe it was about their journey, their soul, their evolution, and I was just one part of their journey. It wasn't about me. So that's the pause button part. The next thing I would say, so the first is good job for setting boundaries. Second is consider pause rather than cut off. Third is how do you talk about those people, right? How do you explain why they're not part of your life? And I think sometimes in order to feel justified in the decisions that we make, we kind of tend to demonize other people. Like we make them the bad guy. It's easy for us to say all the things that they did wrong, and that's why we no longer speak to them. So I would say when you're talking to your children, especially younger children, to be careful about that, to be careful about demonizing other people. Because here's the thing, today you're demonizing them, tomorrow you could be demonizing your kids, right? Or they're learning to demonize you as they grow. And what I mean by demonize is to make them a bad guy, to talk about all the things that they did wrong and only talk about that and not actually present them as a whole person with some, personality characteristics that don't work for you, fine, but presenting them as a whole person. So be mindful about how you talk about them. I'll give you an example. I had a grandfather who was very scary to me as a kid. I was scared of him. He passed away before my kids were born. And so when they ask me about him, I have a choice to make. Am I going to say, oh yeah, he was really violent and aggressive and scary and I didn't want to be around him? That's one way I could talk about him. Or what I do is I say, he came from a different time. The way he grew up, there was a lot of hitting, there was a lot of spanking. And so that was the kind of person that he was. I'm sure he had a really good heart, but he was kind of tough to be around sometimes. Right? So that way you're kind of giving them a chance, even after they've passed away. How do we talk about our loved ones? Can we give them a chance? Even if they're like jerks that you never want to see again, still they're people, right? And we still want to, and the reason I'm talking about this is, it links back to my own karma. When I speak badly about somebody else, that damages my spirit, right? That damages my soul when I'm critical or negative or judging about someone else. That weighs heavy on me, right? And maybe for you it does or it doesn't, but spiritually it absolutely weighs heavy on us when we're unkind to others or about others. And so it's finding a way to be honest, but also be kind as far as describing that person and the reasons. And you don't necessarily have to get into the reasons. You don't necessarily have to get into the stories and the drama. You can just say, oh, at this time we don't really spend much time with them. That might change one day, but for now, we don't really spend much time. And doing it like that rather than like, well, you know what they did, blah, 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 and demonizing. That's really important. The third thing I would say about this is role modeling, right? Your kids are watching what you do, not what you say. Okay. So if you're in a fight with your sister and you've cut her off and you're never going to talk to her again because she's toxic, well, now you have two kids who are siblings. What are you role modeling for them about being a sibling? Hate to say it like that, but it's true, right? What are we role modeling for our children about being a daughter or a son or a sister, or a brother, or a grandchild, right? So we have to think about that. How I am behaving is what my kids are going to learn that is normal and that is acceptable. And then, so if you transplant that onto their lives, do you want them fighting with their siblings the way you're fighting with your siblings? Probably not. And so that's where the incentive to do the healing work comes from. Now, the healing work doesn't mean you have to be best friends with them. You have to say, okay, it's all over, let's start fresh. You don't have to do any of that. But what it means is how you think about them, how you talk about them is with some degree of care, even if they're difficult people. Even if they're difficult people. And so, that's something to bring up that, my sister and I, we don't spend much time together, and I want that to be different for you guys. And one of the reasons we don't spend much time together is because we don't communicate very well. We don't know how to listen to each other very well. Not she doesn't know how to listen to me, right? So this way you're role modeling for your children that, okay, family conflict can occur, but there's also hope. There's also hope, and that pause button helps with that role modeling as well. So those are my thoughts for this particular question. It's a hard one because on the first hand, you are setting boundaries, which is good. The second thing is pause button rather than cutting off. Third thing is how do you talk about that person? And the fourth is what are you role modeling? So those are my thoughts, Ranjini, about your question. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have a question about relationships, personal growth, mental health, please send me a question. The website's at the end of this video. And join us if you can for Monday Musings. Every Monday, we have a 1 hour drop-in community learning event online where we chat about all kinds of different topics to do with mental health. We're in 2022 and I'm making this video, and this particular month is October, so we're talking about parenting. And so that's something that you might want to join. Whenever you're watching this video, we might not even be doing it by the time you watch this video, but if you're around and if it sounds like something interesting, check out the website. You can register, get your link, and then join us for free and just anonymously on a Zoom screen. So that's it for me. I will see you next time. Bye.